I'm Dr. G4, and welcome to Proto-Future, a podcast about narrating Reddit rants as cheap filler content. This is bonus episode 3, Transit is Not Euclidean, a Mini-festo. In this episode, I'll share some recent thoughts I had on the effectiveness of the direction of urbanist activism. I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and I think I've come up with a novel, likely presently unpopular, but potentially massively useful perspective on urbanism. Let's see how this lands. Chapter 1. Of course, it began in Switzerland. A lot of this came from two things. Firstly, when I visited family in Switzerland and Austria for a few weeks, I saw how incredible their rail system was, not just for urban travel and major destinations, but also for extremely rural, low-density environments in the absolute boonies. Part of why this works is because transit isn't made viable by density, but by density around the train stations. So-called peri-urbanism is where otherwise rural areas cluster in walkable villages around train stations. You know, exactly like America was before the 1940s, justifying hourly or better train service to within a 15-minute walk of over 70% of all Swiss residents, but still allowing farmers to live a quick bike ride away from their fields. Furthermore, I even saw a few trains and even urban tram stations serving 0 people. They were trailhead stations to connect locals with nature and hiking opportunities. Instead of building trains only on major routes, then filling out the rest of the necessary network with buses, it was expected that one should be able to reasonably live an entire life by train, and that buses were instead niche gap fillers, not lower capacity tools otherwise completely identical to trains in quality and usefulness. Secondly, I recently organized a highway revolt, of unsure outcome. Please call PennDOT and tell them you'll be less likely to visit and spend money in central Pennsylvania if the SCIC highway is built, which involved collating reams of scientific data on why cars are bad. It's almost like we were scooped by life after cars. Check out centercountyhighwayrevolt.org for a ton of citations to the stipulations referenced herein. One of the things that I worked on was the cost of car infrastructure, and I found that, both by theoretical calculations and according to Pennsylvania's own published budgets, a mile of road is more expensive both to build and maintain than a mile of rail. There are a huge variety of factors to this, but to my understanding, it's mostly because the huge width of roads makes land acquisition more expensive, and the wear and tear of heavyweight vehicles requires road surfacing much more frequently than train tracks require replacing. These two things sent me spiraling into a radical realization. Trains are not just a high-expense, high-quality version of transit, but the most preferable form of any transport infrastructure. Allow me to explain how this works. Chapter 2. Transit, land use, and sustainability are three sides of the same hypercoin. Euclidean zoning, as I'm certain many of us know, is a form of land use regulation started in Euclid, Ohio in the 1920s, and has since taken over Western planning as a way to regimentalize which land uses are allowable in each area. Specifically, it is incremental. Each category starts with a base assumption, a large lot single-family home usually, and then steps up each level with more stories and density as the city gets bigger. Or doesn't, pushing sprawling, low-density development to the periphery of the city in a low-fiber diarrhea of humanity streaked along the underpants of Mother Nature. As I'm certain you can interpolate, this has some humongously disqualifying problems from the perspective of sustainability, but I'd instead like to make a similar point that modern transportation infrastructure has fallen into the same trap, even among urbanists. The way we approach transit at present goes thusly. For all areas, even the most rural ones, we build a road. If the road reaches a certain level of usefulness, we build a bike lane or a sidewalk. If enough people live along the road, we build a bus. If the bus is full, we build a tram. If the tram is too small, we build light rail. If the light rail doesn't have enough capacity, it's time for a subway. If the area is too large for a subway, we build commuter rail. If the region is multipolar, we build regional rail. If that doesn't work, we dream up a gadget bomb, and so on and so forth. While this is, of course, a gross oversimplification, I think many would agree that it somewhat reflects how transportation is approached today, in a capacity-oriented stepwise pyramid. In fact, countless hordes have noted something to the effect of, buses are the core of a good transit system. I think this is in error. Chapter 3. Bustitution. Since the goal of urbanism is to make more sustainable, equitable transportation, and since this generally means being anti-car dependence, I think it should cause concern among advocates that bus infrastructure looks so suspiciously like car infrastructure, and outside of only the rarest and highest quality BRTs, bus infrastructure is usually used overwhelmingly more by cars than buses. As such, to build a transit system from a base of buses means you've already likely lost to car dominance. Furthermore, as noted above, bus, or road, infrastructure costs more to operate and maintain than equivalent rail infrastructure, hampering the construction of high-quality transit with higher than otherwise costs, not even counting the hundreds of knock-on negative externalities regarding things like carcinogenic tire dust. Additionally, I'd also argue that buses harm the perception of transit generally. Having initially been interested in and nostalgic for buses, I've ridden premier BRT and BRT light systems in Pittsburgh, New York, Seattle, Cleveland, Indianapolis, Eugene, Houston, Los Angeles, San Diego, and probably a few others I'm forgetting, but the more I rode BRT, the more my opinions changed to disliking it. Even the best buses made uncomfortable, loud crashing noises every time they roll over an amoeba, offer much less stable and comfortable acceleration than a train, and can become a truly miserable experience the moment you let the pavement quality slip. I'm looking at you, Cleveland. Buses are also much harder than almost any other form of transit to navigate as a disabled person, bicyclist, or someone with luggage. Having been to all 50 states and 15 with my folding bicycle, I always avoid buses because they're so uncomfortable and inconvenient. If my only option to visit a place is a bus, I simply just don't go, or take longer to bicycle the length of the bus route rather than riding it, because I'd rather not make myself miserable suffering through second-class transit. In essence, at risk of potentially being an extremist, I think that buses represent the epitome of transit as an afterthought stapled to the periphery of an automotrocity. To have buses as your primary mode of transit means you've already lost the game and are only capable of playing catch-up. Chapter 4. Non-Euclidean Transit. So, taking all these together, especially that a mile of rail is cheaper to both build and maintain than a mile of road, and that high-quality rail transit is entirely viable even in rural areas, I think that a better view of transit is that everybody needs to make 3 types of vehicle-assisted trips: short, medium, and far. Of course, placing walkability at the center of this paradigm, I think it can be depicted as a triangle with vertices each of tram, bicycle, and S-Bahn. Bicycles are the easiest to explain. Just build bike trails all over the world instead of roads. And I will note their extreme lightweight makes bike asphalt last much longer than car asphalt, addressing the wasteful cost of roads. Bike trails can be used for short trips by grandmas or insanely long trips by bike packers, light-duty trips with a scooter, or heavy-duty trips with cargo bicycles or even bicycle trucks. This would especially apply for rural areas up to a dozen or so miles from a train station. Especially with e-bikes, anyone, no matter how unfit or how bad the weather, can easily bicycle a half hour anywhere. I've literally done this with my severely disabled mother. If she could bicycle from Richmond to Oakland in the rain, nearly anyone can bike for daily errands. And I've proven this myself, living for over a year car-free and almost a decade car-light in rural central Pennsylvania, under 5 minutes away from farmers' fields. Cars are and should not be needed anywhere, even in rural areas. Trams and S-Bahn are related. They're both usually at grade, cutting costs in comparison to things like light rail, subway-style regional rail a la BART or WMATA, or hell, even high-quality commuter rail. As aforementioned, with Dutch-style peri-urbanism, each village or neighborhood could have one or more S-Bahn stations for travel from sub-regional to intercity, and around each station could radiate a small network of trams, Straßenbahnen, for either local or inter-neighborhood travel. As with any good system, and to further address costs, frequencies can be boosted by interlining in main areas, with less populated distal branches getting fractional headways based on service patterns. One of my personal greatest irritations at the US's Great Society metros is that they bring downtown-sized frequencies all the way out to the furthest suburbs, wasting money in the burbs on operators and vehicle maintenance, while underserving the city cores where the capacity is needed the most. Importantly, both Straßenbahnen and Schnellbahnen are extremely cost-efficient, reusing existing infrastructure, such as streets or railroad rights-of-way, to bring more lines than could have been built with new alignments alone, creating a network effect. I'm always suspicious of RM transit-style activists who obsess over service quality, because high-capacity, high-quality transit modes usually cost 5 to 10 times more than other options, but are almost never worth building 4 to 9 fewer lines for. Just build a line with 75% of the capacity or reliability, but use the leftover funds to run a second line through a different part of the same neighborhood. Furthermore, the most common complaints about street-running rail alignments are, in fact, about cars. If we just ban cars from crossing a street-running rail alignment, there's almost no reliability downside to street running. And this even addresses the famous North American cost snake eating transit budgets. The vast majority of transit construction expenses go to things like suburban tunnels, long and elaborate viaducts, and major road reconstructions, all intended to, you guessed it, not have a negative impact on car traffic at all. If we just build rail transit at grade down the middle of every strode, then completely ignore the needs of cars and prohibit them from crossing over, under, or through the transit line for its entire length, all of a sudden it's no longer difficult or expensive to build rail transit. Of course, though, you would allow pedestrians and bicycles through, using transit as district-wide modal filters, preventing cars from being remotely useful. Who cares about the hurdles of getting congestion pricing when you could just literally imprison cars in their neighborhoods? Oh, and don't forget about how the median parking space in a garage costs something like $80,000. No park and rides, no bloated transit budgets. In this non-Euclidean transit, a triangle of tram, S-Bahn, and bike trails can, with proper zoning and walkability, cover nearly all possible transportation needs, even in rural areas. Much like planes and gadget bonds are considered now, so too should subways, cars, and even buses be considered edge cases for use in only extremely rare and unique situations. Chapter 5. We're in the midst of a culture war. We should act like it. An important corollary of this is that I believe urbanism should mean the near eradication of cars. Scientifically, cars are a negative-sum game, making any possible project worse by their inclusion, costing more for the environment and the economy than the sum of any benefit brought to individuals. And yet, cars have infested absolutely everywhere like cockroaches, even bastions of urbanism like the Netherlands. 48% of Dutch people own cars, meaning that their work is only half done. A humongous sea change in how the world does business is absolutely necessary to survive the impending climate apocalypse, and given that cars and trucks are the leading cause of carbon emissions, the first and foremost change which must occur is not a wimpy minor reduction in car usage, but a complete and unconditional dethroning of their dominance. Let me say that compromise is inevitable. Bipartisanship can, occasionally, be useful, and it's a very tall order to ban cars completely everywhere forever immediately. However, I would argue that there is a humongous difference between a movement built around ban cars and one built around, perhaps could we maybe sorta have a few more options for getting around, but you're totally allowed to keep killing us in your pedestrian-crushing battle wagon. We're just about giving people choices, and it's totally fine if the choice you want to make is a bad one that will harm the rest of us. Importantly, the opposition already believes that we're trying to take away their cars, despite that nearly every publicly quoted urbanist has yet to go that far, and instead tries to spin the issue as bipartisan, saying things like, we're just trying to make communities more resilient, and there's no such thing as a Democrat bridge or a Republican bridge, which is incorrect. A Democrat bridge is one built for trains and bicycles, like the Tillamook Crossing in Portland. A Republican bridge is one built for cars. If such moderate positions are already being treated with absolutely unhinged conspiratorial responses by suburban shit-for-brains and rural chuckle fascists completely decoupled from reality, logic, and common sense, appealing to bipartisanship and centrist racism will only serve to let the Overton window be dragged even further afield of the unavoidably necessary top-to-bottom reorientation of priorities needed to help prevent America, derogatory, from sliding any further behind the Human Development Index of Slovenia. Cars, carbrain, and the American way of life are almost epistemologically an exercise in selfishness and lizard brain emotionality. Approaching this conundrum with neutral facts and dry economic arguments is bringing a knife to a gunfight. We need a better approach. I believe that setting the goal of completely eradicating cars and falling short of it will result in much more progress than could ever be brought about by fully achieving a goal made bland enough to appeal to anyone. Chapter 6. Completely unhinged TLDR. Cars are like guns. They should be banned immediately everywhere. It is entirely feasible to eradicate cars in rural areas as well as dense cities. It's called Central Europe, and also all of America before the 1920s. Car infrastructure is unwoke. Bus infrastructure looks suspiciously like car infrastructure. Thus, by the transitive principle, buses are unwoke. According to published state budgets, a mile of road costs more to build and maintain than a mile of rail, even at hyperinflated American transit prices. As such, cars are the wrong answer to every transportation question. The absurdly high cost of North American transit can easily be addressed by just ignoring the needs of cars. At-grade rail lines down the middle of stroads are made both cheaper and more reliable simply by prohibiting cars from crossing the rail line with under or overpasses or mixed traffic. A movement whose end goal is already a neutral bipartisan compromise is only ever slated to get watered down further. Big changes require big goals, and if we're ever to see any meaningful progress within our lifetimes, the stated goal of urbanism should be a complete and unconditional eradication of the automobile. Finally, be vegan for transit. Just say no to cars. This has been bonus episode 3 of the Proto-Future podcast, Transit is Not Euclidean, a Mini-festo. The theme music is Spark of Life by Benjamin Lazarus through Tribe of Noise. I would like to thank my extremely generous and patient patrons, Pedro Reyes, Ron Kleiss, Bill Ford, Linda Eskin, and Roger Coleman. If you would like to know more, you can visit the website at www.bgtmrring.org. That's Bravo Golf Tango, Michael Romeo Romeo, Indigo November Golf, Oscar Romeo Golf. To listen to the Manifesto and Prologue series, watch the Modern Modeling Clinic anthology, or read the free-to-access Patreon production blog. And please consider donating as little as $1 an episode to help defer hosting, equipment, and travel costs and support what I do. This content is CAN-credentialed. You can report instances of harassment, abuse, or other harm to their hotline at 617-249-4255 or on their website at creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org. To the best of my knowledge, this podcast is entirely free of content generated, edited, produced, or modified in any way by AI. This podcast was written, recorded, and produced on the ancestral lands of the Tongva, Chumash, Kilkapoy, Tawakoni, Wichita, and Humanos tribes. I would like to thank them for their historical stewardship of Southern California and Northern Texas. Thank you very much for listening. Keep riding trains, keep punching Nazis, and keep building a better future.